Well, it's hard to generalize because the relationship between teacher and student on the level of composing and conducting is such a elevated one that you really you need to have very strong personal ties. So the dusty aspect of academia in Vienna never really applied to conductors and composers, I thought. Well, it was certainly clearly the land of opportunity for me. I mean, I did have all my learning was done on scholarships, and this country was very generous to me. Well, actually, at first, my great idol was Gustav Mahler, and so I wanted to do a Gustav Mahler bit. But then, when I was about 19 or so, I realized that the composition was not really my strong suit. I was not going to be a very good composer. So I decided to stop thinking about that and concentrate on being a conductor. It was a newspaper article. Sometime in, I think it was in September of '43, I looked through the newspaper and saw a little item about the Mecca temple being taken over by the city. And so I then surmised the mayor of New York was LaGuardia at that time, and he loved music. I knew that. So I figured there would be, the city would do something there, and I just simply went down there and offered my services. And lo and behold, again, the land of opportunity. I was, after severe testing, I must say, I was accepted on the lowest rung of the musical ladder and became a member of the New York City Opera even before one note had been publicly played. Well, as I said, this country is a wonderful country and things can happen very quickly. I worked very hard. I did everything. I was really the maid of all work, and showed my versatility, and showed my idealism, my desire, and my absolute wish beyond anything else to be in the music world. There was great excitement, there was great hope, you know, young people. It was a very good combination at first of young, relatively untried performers and some seasoned older ones like Zorina Giannini, George Chaplitsky, who gave a certain leavening to the enterprise. Their experience, their many years of actual performance, somehow was accepted and absorbed by the young people. And there was a great deal of enthusiasm. She was a great artist, and what was so strange that occasionally a singer, an artist who had sung in Vienna and whom I had heard as a little boy when I went to the opera, suddenly appeared in New York, as was Giannini. The case was with her. She had been an international star, and whenever she came to Vienna, I wanted to be sure to listen to her because she was so authentic in her performance, her portrayal. The whole idea of the American seasons, which became a worldwide miracle in a way, was somehow happened on a dare, because we were looking for ways of expanding the opera company's season. And of course, we were trying to get support from some foundations. And the Ford Foundation, through its director, McLaury, was eager to help us if we could find some way that would fit into their overall scheme of support. And so somehow we talked about that Americans really have an inferiority complex about their music and don't really believe in it. And I said, I bet you I could put together a season or two of American operas. And I was taken up on that there, and then I had to look through some 200 operas, some in handwritten, still handwritten, and some in poor handwriting, we might say. And so out of those, I not only got one season, but actually that was quite successful. And so we had the second and third season and a national tour. And then it expanded to beyond just the American season. It became a 20th century season. And the last of the grants, which was a 20th century season, the last of the grants was the season that we moved into Lincoln Center. It evolved. We were looking for ways to present this idea, and we had a lot of goodwill, I must say. But there was also a lot of naysaying, naturally. And then when the first season was so successful, then we had gotten the approval of the Ford Foundation and a little money, not much, but a little money, that got us really on our way. Oh yes, absolutely. You could feel, you could see in the national press the change, the attitude was improved a great deal at first. Those that were dubious were won over by the incredible achievement. I must say the company was extraordinary. I don't take credit for that. Everybody worked so hard. Everybody was such an idealist. There were no limitations to what we could do. It was a difficult move, and at first I didn't want to go, and the Met didn't want us to go, so it, however, evolved then for states' reasons. It evolved that we had to move into the Lincoln Center, and it meant we knew that one of the reasons that I didn't want to go is because I knew the expenses would be mounting. What we could get away with in terms of simplicity and just imagination in the old house would not be acceptable in the more rarefied confines of the Lincoln Center. So I knew that I had to enlarge the orchestra, I had to enlarge the chorus, and so and these productions, still being rather inexpensive, comparatively speaking, but we had to make them a little bit more expensive. Great interest. I mean, since my very earliest childhood, I was interested in theater. I made myself little puppet theaters when I was only 8, 9 years old. And as I grew, these theaters became more sophisticated and more showpieces, actually, for me. Well, our belief was, and one of the strong legs on which we stood, was that the opera is music and drama. and has to be, both have to be equal, given equal billing. With the discovery of Miss Sills, the international community sort of got a heads-up sign and got excited about what we at the opera had to offer. And there was actually Julius Caesar I chose because I also thought we had this wonderful bass, Norman Tregel, and that I would have him be Caesar, and Sills would be Cleopatra, and we would have a revival of a Handel opera which hadn't been heard in New York in years, many years. In fact, there was really no professional performance of Handel that I can remember before we took on Julius Caesar. And that, of course, started the whole Baroque seasons that we had. We had a wonderful cast, and that's why I thought we could do it. In fact, I was again poo-pooed and said, you'll see, nobody will come to Baroque opera. And of course, that was not so. We had people clamoring for tickets, and it was a great, great success. No, we amused ourselves in remembering that Miss Sills had been singing with the New York City Opera and leading roles for some almost 15 years before she was discovered by the broad public and given her due. But she was with us, a very good member of the ensemble, always reliable. I remember she helped out when it had to be, when somebody got sick. She sometimes did 2 performances in a day, even, to help us out. And she was, of course, a wonderful performer, and she began to be, the New York City Opera was clearly associated with her, and vice versa. Well, I think singers were happy because basically I would try to give them roles that were suitable to them, and discovered, thereby we discovered lots of talent. But it was a question of finding the right repertory for everybody. And then there was the question of real representation, visual representation that was in line with 20th century theatrical practices. What was a great responsibility for us is to feature the young talent that auditioned for us. And I might say, you know, it is important to know that anybody could come and sing for us. They didn't have to have anybody to talk for them. They just had to perform. And so we would find new talent and groom the talent according to the best voice and the best dramatic aspect of performing. There is one performance that has a special place in my memory, and that is a Don Giovanni, which I conducted in the Divadlo Till in Prague, which is where it was premiered in the 18th century. And I actually stood on the spot where Mozart stood when he conducted that. And to me, that was awesome. Yes, and I think I'll take a little bit of credit for us for that, because it is the opening up of American writing, operatic writing and performing. Now I think every company in the States feels that it's important to feature at least one world premiere And I think that is the attitude that has changed completely from 60 years ago. Hugo Weisgar's Six Characters in Search of an Author, I thought was a brilliant opera. And I was glad to make it, give it the world premiere. There was also Good Soldier Schweik by, unfortunately, young composer who died before the premiere. It was very sad, but he never saw his own work performed. But there are a number of Robert Ward, Crucible. There are a number of works that now I think are being more or less accepted on the operatic trail. It was a mixture of feelings, you know. I had spent so many years there, and then to return to it was a very unique feeling for me. I must say, at first I was a little bit questioning myself, but it was Cosi Fan Tutte, which is an opera I love and have done a number of times. So I was looking forward to that, and the cast was very good, so it turned out to be a really wonderful experience. Part of the training that we give young singers is, of course, that they understudy the more mature performers, so that we have coverage, so to speak. If somebody gets sick, we are covered, we are prepared. And in all the years that I was at Lincoln Center, it only happened once that we at City Opera had illness which robbed us of our leading singer and her understudy. And the Met was using our understudy as their understudy as well, so that both houses had to change the bill that evening because there was nobody else left to sing. I called Beverly Sills and said, would you like to jump in and do Let's do Traviata, I'll conduct it. And so we put together this Traviata without any rehearsal, whatever. And of course it was because Sills and I musically had always understood each other so well. We didn't even need to, as she said, she didn't even need to think about it. I would know ahead of time what she was going to do. Well, just the fact that you can interpret anything given in several ways, and just to see what is your co-artist going to do, what would he or she like to do here, and that still fits within the overall idea of the performance. So we don't have clashing of styles and of wills, as it may be. Well, there were many practical problems to consider. The various constituents that were going to be involved at Kennedy Center. And so it was a question of finding a varied program that would take care of the various components. And that was a little difficult. And of course, we had really, when we started planning it, the building was not yet finished. So there we were planning for a building that was unfinished by scheduling two works that were unfinished, namely the Ginastera Beatrix Cenci, which was going to be world premiere, and which Ginastera was still writing at the time of the rehearsals. He was not finished by any means. And then there was one Baroque piece, a Handel opera, Ario Dante, which was going to give balance to the other two. I did some so-called festivals, the festival of the 20th, the 18th and the 20th century, where we didn't play anything of the 19th century at all, stayed with the other two. We did a Mozart festival in which we did Idomeneo, and that later on I transferred to the New York City Opera. That's one of the advantages of being in several places, was that I could utilize whatever we did in one place. I could try to utilize it in another place as well. It really had just happened. It really evolved because with the personalities and the talents and special gifts that these various components of an opera company brought to it. The enthusiasm, their feeling of pride, there was we had there was little room for anything negative, because we were all so caught up in the excitement of the creativity.